Hey, Pam.
Good morning, Robyn.
It is the morning for us today. We decided to record early. And this podcast is brought to you by Leslie, and it is regarding the topic of grace, giving grace to yourself and others. I find it to be an incredibly interesting topic. And after I've mentioned it to a few people, lots of people are really interested in knowing about the topic of giving grace to yourself and giving grace to others. And what does that mean?
What does it look like to you?
What does it look like to you? Let's start with giving grace to others.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think giving grace to others means accepting them for who they are, giving them a little bit of a break. I asked Daniel last night, I said, what does giving grace mean to you? I said, come on, let's talk about it. And he's like, well, isn't it the same as giving someone a break? And I said, maybe in a gray area, but to me, giving grace to somebody is bigger than giving them a break.
Oh, in what way?
Or cutting them some slack. Like giving you some grace is allowing you to do what is important to you or what makes you happy or brings you joy without judgment. It's not an excuse. It's not a cop out. Or sometimes I feel like, oh, give me a break is more like pass it off. This is who I am kind of a thing, where I feel like giving someone grace really is more than that.
Wow.
It's early.
It is early. I think about giving grace to others somewhat similar, not quite as deep as you went into it. Mine is more of a brush off, as if you see somebody cut somebody off in line at the grocery store, the self checks, and somebody doesn't realize that there's a line and they cut somebody off. Sometimes I'll just let it go. Is it that big of a deal? No, they just didn't know. To me, that's giving grace to somebody, allowing them to, I guess, make a mistake in a way. Not really. They just didn't know what they were doing. Giving grace to me seems to be more spiritual in a way. I've been thinking about the mental, the physical, and the spiritual, and I relate to grace a little more spiritually than I thought I had after I started thinking.
How so?
More about, and this sounds crazy, what would God do? Would God do the same thing that I do several times and just let it go and not say something to somebody? Or other times I'll say, oh, excuse me, the line is back here. But could that be called giving grace too, because you're letting the person know the reality of the situation? So therefore, you're giving them the opportunity to correct what they thought was fine, but to correct them and they go back to the line where they were supposed to.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've really been thinking about this for several days since Leslie brought it up. What does it mean, number one, to give grace to yourself? Because that's what the topic was to start with, but then extend it to what does it mean to give grace to others? I looked it up online, of course, and giving grace to another person is simply to forgive them unconditionally. And I thought, okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yep.
So giving grace to somebody else. I will say it was out there. I'm going to get my phone here. Out on the internet, somebody was, I don't quite remember which Facebook group this was. I believe it was the positivity group. And it was, give your word of 2023, or what's a word that we really need to focus on this year. And lots of people said grace. Betty Lehn, Lehn, stated, I think this is a good one to strive for, as we don't give others enough grace. There seems to be constant negativity and harassment, especially on social media. Some are just trolls. but others should know better. Be kind and think before you post. Is it good, kind, uplifting? If not, restraint of the pen and tongue and keyboard is a good start. And I thought, wow, that really captures it.
Yeah, that I think sums pretty much all of it up. And it's interesting you say spiritual and like what would Jesus do? What would God do? Or how would God handle something like that? Grace to me is something you learn about in church a little bit every Sunday, whether it be Sunday school or sitting through mass. Amazing Grace, great song. Gives me goosebumps, chokes me up every time. Talks about how great you are. Yeah, you can be great and have a little speed bump along the way or a pothole. If you live in the Midwest, it's a pothole, most likely. So I don't know, because I've been thinking about that a lot too. And what does it look like to you? What does it look like to other people? And I know the phrase lately is like, oh, you don't know what someone else is going through. You don't know that person who's driving super slow in the fast lane. Maybe they're taking their mom to the nursing home for the last time. You know what I mean? Like out for a ride, things like that. Like, is that a giving grace? I think, I don't know. I guess I don't know. It's a gray area. And I think it's up to each individual. How they
And the
process.
day and the hour and the minute and the second.
Yeah.
Because giving grace at 10 o'clock in the morning might look different than giving grace at 4 o'clock in the afternoon after a long day.
That's true. Very true.
That was something else I thought about. It's very situational.
Yes. And is the person rude that you're giving grace to?
Don't know.
Yeah. I don't, one of my words one of my, I guess, words for the year is to live and love yourself and others. And I think giving grace kind of falls under that umbrella as well. Love that person, even if they're frustrating or irritating or not right.
And then how do you do that? Which then goes into forgiveness. I believe I've talked about it in much earlier versions of this podcast that when I was in grad school, there was a lady who was shot in the head. 2 young boys went to her house, stole her car, shot her in the head, took off, and the class was about forgiveness, which, excuse me, when you said the word forgive, it triggered in my mind the story of this lady and her power to forgive the 2 young kids that went to her house, stole her vehicle, and shot her for dead in the back of the head. And actually went and felt the back of her head where the bullet hole went in. Most everybody did. And it was a lesson on forgiveness. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how you do that. Somebody intentionally was trying to kill you. How do you forgive somebody for that act of harm against you? And then Dr. Billy Alsbrooks, Ashley and I had interviewed him quite a while ago. Still have his book. I still take it to the cabin every single time I go. And he too talks about how do you forgive other people? And you really need to learn how to forgive. And then you think, okay, if I'm going down this path, is it the same as grace? Which comes right back to your point.
My head is hurting. This is a lot of information. I remember that podcast. I remember listening to that podcast. I remember talking about that lady, and I too was right there with you. Like, I instantly go to anger. Like, how do you forgive whew.
If somebody does something egregiously to you on purpose, let's take a work situation. One of your coworkers does something to, I'm going to say, throw you under the bus when they specifically know that you did not do or say what you're being accused of. And thankfully, I did have best co-pilot in the world ever, Dawn, and I did have documentation to come back to say, not sure where you got your info, But when somebody purposely tries to, I don't want to say get you in trouble, I don't think that was the case, but how do you forgive somebody for that? Or how do you forgive a friend that intentionally speaks poorly of you or says something, even though they know that it's not true? How do you forgive somebody for doing that?
Right.
I know you've had a couple situations years ago where you've been really frustrated, and how could so and so have even said blah, blah, blah?
Right.
Working in the same office, you guys relatively would see each other in your cubes or, however, you're close enough to know. And the
Right.
person still accused you of something that you couldn't have seriously possibly have done.
Right. Yeah, because the first instinct is anger, like frustration, defense, like all of that. And then it's like, okay, I don't know. That's a really good one because I think forgiveness is huge.
Yeah, it will always be a work in progress for me.
Me too.
Especially when somebody intentionally
Right.
is telling a lie, a fabrication. I don't know what terminology you want to use.
Right.
How do you give grace to that other person knowing? And when you feel like they know they are specifically targeting you, how do you give that person grace? And how
Okay.
do you look at it differently from their point of view? And is it really targeting, or is it the way that they really
Mhm.
think that it is? Is it really their perception?
So there's an individual that that I work with who is constantly telling new stories about his life. And they're so far-fetched. They are, I don't know if we've talked about him before, but I mean, so out there and so far-fetched that you just stop and look at him and go, that's not reality. Well, yes, it is. It's, but it's not. So then you think, okay, at what point do you just ignore it and let it go? It's his delusional world that he's living in.
Then how do you give that person grace? What does that look like? I'm going to go all the way back to what you started with. What does it look like to you? So me knowing you, I would say you would just nod your head and say, oh, what a nice thing to do. And for you, that would be offering grace.
Yes, I think that's a good example. Yes.
I would do the same. I would nod my head probably. Because is it worth the argument of whatever the argument is? No.
Right. And it's funny because then I walk away and I roll. No, and I had talked to Dan about it one day and I said, who am I to judge his hopes and dreams? Who am I to, honestly, okay, if that's what you guys want to do, while it might seem unrealistic to me, that might deep down be something that's very important to him.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, you offer up grace. You keep your mouth quiet. So grace looks like biting your tongue sometimes.
It is, or trying to understand the other person's reasoning. Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Whew.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we haven't even got to what does grace look like for ourselves. Right.
I'm already sweating.
I know. What does it mean to give myself grace? And when I looked this up, give yourself grace is permission to forgive your mistakes, lapses in judgment, and hurtful behavior because no one is perfect. The saying has deep roots in yoga and faith communities, and it frequently shows up online as a hashtag or inspirational quote. This one we could talk about again for days. What does it mean to give grace to yourself? Which is really how Leslie and I started the whole conversation.
Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, really what we were trying to say was, does giving grace to yourself give you an out for your excuses? I don't want to work out today. I don't want to do the laundry today. I don't want to do the dishes today. If I just rest today, then tomorrow I'll have more energy to get it done.
Mhm. To some, that looks like an excuse.
To some, that does look like an excuse. Leslie is much more hardened against the excuses. Just do it and get it done. My comment to her was, and let's just use exercise as an example, because that is what we were talking about. My point was, but you do need rest days. Your body does need to rest. Your body does need to recirculate, do all the things that it needs to do in order to get you back to, I'm going to say, a more full battery. That's how I always liken it to. If my battery is low, how am I going to do a good job at whatever exercise it is, when if I just give myself grace, give myself a rest day, tomorrow my battery's back up at 70 or 80 or 90. Leslie is a bit more of, there's no reason my body can't do this. I'm just going to get up and get it done. You know, we're not talking hours long workout sessions either. So, you know, a 30-minute session, a 45-minute session, maybe an hour session, nothing extravagant. But on the other hand, I come back to say, but give your body some grace, forgive your body a little bit, let your body re-heal. I'm at one end of the spectrum. Leslie's at the other end of the spectrum. Where are you?
I'm in your corner right now, because I feel like part of giving grace when it comes to exercise and eating is mindset. What does taking that day off look like? Does it mean eating like whatever you want to? Does diet and exercise go hand in hand? I'm going to take today off because mentally I'm just exhausted. Physically, I'm just exhausted. I'm not going to do it. Not only that, but you're not going to, in my opinion, today is you're not going to gain anything by pushing yourself beyond that point. So how about take the rest day, give yourself the grace, don't make it a habit. And the next day when you wake up, be like, okay, you know what? I had yesterday off. Today's the day. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, except when you go back to the definition of giving yourself grace. To forgive, and this is where I come back to Leslie, and I think Leslie might be a little more on track here, which, you know, hopefully she won't listen to this podcast. Permission to forgive your mistakes. Okay, saying I'm going to do my workout today and then don't, that's not a mistake. It's not a lapse in judgment. It's not hurtful behavior. And yes, of course, nobody's perfect. So then I go back to, well, I don't like that definition.
I got to Google a different one.
I got to keep looking for the definition I like. But then I think, well, then maybe she's right. Because I go back to being on the mountain on my 5th ascent, not asking the question that I should have asked. If we go with Leslie's logic and we go with this definition, what would the harm be in doing the 20-minute exercise? Am I really damaging myself? Probably not. Am I really that exhausted? Maybe some days, let's just say occasionally. But the majority of the time, and I'll use my word of 2023, consistency. Could you have done that 20-minute workout and still felt the same as you would if you hadn't done it the next day? And I'm going to say, probably, as long as it wasn't, you know, an unbelievably hard, you know, walking at 40% incline for an hour.
Right.
That's different than, is this the all day running co's 365 workout for the day that Robyn has not done?
Burpees. That's all I got to say about that.
I don't even mind burpees, but it just goes back to Am I making an excuse for not doing it? Am I being lazy? Yeah, I think so. I think so, because these are not, at my point in training right now, these are not difficult exercises. And then you go to your perspective. Where are you in your journey today? So today, there's no reason I can't be doing every single day, no matter what time of day it is. I can find 30 minutes to get these in because they're normally a little bit less. Could I have done that a year or 2 years ago? 2 years ago, no. A year ago, 50-50. Today, 100%. In a year from now, it won't even be a thought process. So now you have to add that in to giving yourself grace. What did I look like 2 years ago, a year ago today, next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now?
I just saw a meme or something posted, I think, on Facebook that said, today it might be hard, but tomorrow it'll be your warm up. And I was like, oh, so true. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Mhm.
So are we giving ourselves an excuse and a way out? I have to think yes. I do. I know you don't like that, but yeah, I think for some things. So a 10-minute walk on the treadmill. Is that really going to do damage? Or I keep using the word damage. I don't quite mean damage, but is it going to interrupt your body's healing process? I'm going to probably go with no for the vast majority of people. Would an
Okay.
hour at 40% incline? Yeah, I get that.
I have a lot to say.
Go for it. I'm going to drink my coffee.
Okay. So while I hear what you're saying, and I do agree to a degree, I also think there are Olympic athletes who do not train or work out or do things every single day. I think when you allow yourself one day or a half a day or whatever it may be, I think that's important. Because I think so many thoughts. If you push yourself too much and it becomes too much of a, well, I have to do this, the joy in what you're doing becomes less and less.
100%. I am completely on board with you for that.
So to give yourself a day to save yourself joy and to, let's call it, allow yourself grace, is not the end of the world. And I think in the words, okay, tongue tied, in the words of Matt Scoletti, who you've had on before, one day off is a rest, 2 days off is a habit.
All right. I like that.
So, and that might not be word for word, but basically the gist of it was, if you take today off as a rest day because you need it, you feel it, whatever, that's a rest. But day 2 and day 3, that's a new habit. Don't fall into that cycle. And I think I hear that often. Again, I am not as hardcore as you are by any means with your training.
I'm not, yeah, I would not call myself hardcore.
Well,
Matt Scoletti.
yes. Maybe someday we'll go to Pittsburgh and do Savage Saturday.
I would love to do that.
Will there be pizza afterwards? What'd you say?
I would say, Matt, can we use your floor? We'll sleep on the floor. We don't care.
Right. But I think that ties into giving yourself grace. You know what? Today I'm just going to take a break. Tomorrow, if I do it, then now I'm creating a new habit. Now I'm using it as an excuse or a crutch to not have to do it. And what are your intentions? Maybe you take today off, but then tomorrow you do 2 workouts because you feel better because you took the day before off. So I'm going to touch on alcohol a little bit with the giving yourself grace. As we know, am doing a dry January-ish. Not going to stick to just January, but I think about, okay, so what does it look like when I go out for coffee one morning and I really want some Baileys in it? I might have Baileys in it. Can I give myself enough grace to know that that one time is not the end of the world? Yes, of course. Is that going to be the new lifestyle? No, it's not. But at what point do you say it's okay to do this a little bit, as long as it's not a lot of it?
It
You-
goes back to what you said. So Saturday, and let's just say Sunday, I have a little bit of Bailey's in my coffee.
Yep.
But then Monday, you're back on track.
And it's okay.
And it's okay.
It is interesting what you found on the internet for it. Also what you found on Facebook in that group about it as well. But it's also interesting when we start talking about things, and that's how us recording this morning came up, because we were talking about taking the day off and giving yourself some grace. I declared 3 different times yesterday after Kinsley was picked up, I am not getting on the treadmill tonight. I am not working out tonight. Dan's like, okay, not a big deal. I'm like, I'm trying to convince myself that I'm not going to.
I'm trying to tell myself it's okay to give myself a break.
Right. Because I feel strongly that giving yourself a break is always, not always, but giving yourself a break or giving yourself grace up until recently has always kind of been frowned upon. Like, get up and get doing it. There's no reason you can't do it. You got 2 legs, 2 arms, you're full functioning, get up and do it. But I don't feel like it today.
But then I think, all right, I don't feel like it today.
Mhm.
I'm going to go into our 6:15 workout. A couple years ago, a few ladies and I would do 6:15 workout. I believe it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I do think that we always took Wednesday off. Maybe we didn't in the beginning. I don't remember.
We did, yes.
And well, before you. And then you came on, and then we switched it to Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, probably because mentally I was burned out by doing it every morning. And then you and I tried to get it started back up again a couple of times, and wasn't an excuse. I'm going to say no, because we continue to do exercise at different times of the day.
Mhm.
I have found I am not a fan of getting up and getting exercise in right away in the morning. I'm just not. I don't want to. In the spring, if it's a beautiful morning and I want to go outside for a walk around the block, absolutely. But in general, I'm not an early morning workout person. Do I feel better? Yes. I always feel better, but I just don't want to do it. Is that an excuse? I don't know. I would say that I've done it long enough to know that I just really don't care for it. Will I do it? Of course I will, but if I had to. But going back to your point in Matt Scoletti, when does it become a habit of not
Mhm.
doing it? Now, if you don't do it in the afternoon or you don't do it in the evening, then that does become a habit. I like where you're going with it. I like where Leslie's going with it. Leslie's a little more on the Matt Scoletti train. You and I think, are a bit more lax of giving ourselves grace.
Mhm.
My big question then, at what point does it turn into an excuse?
Mhm.
Day 2?
Mhm.
Day 3? Certainly, I would think by day 4. But is 2 or 3 days, depending again on how much of an exertion you gave,
Mhm.
it's really all dependent on several different things.
So one day last week, I figured out that I could get iFit on our TV in the living room. I think it was last Monday. And I was like, this is amazing. And I did a stretching workout. It was great. It was 8 minutes of stretching with John Peel. Did I want to do it? No. But I had to try it out. and I enjoyed it. But on the flip side, I felt so much better after it was done. Why can't we bottle up that feeling when we're done with the task? We're done working out and our endorphins are high, our adrenaline is pushing. Why can't we bottle that up for the days that we just can't get off the couch?
I go back to body battery. Your body battery, I think the temperatures, outside, inside, the sun or the
Mhm.
clouds, raining, snowing, a light breeze, a wind gust.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, you have to go back and look at all these features. Buffy will love this. As I've been thinking about this podcast, you and I in the past have always talked about putting things down on a calendar. And most everybody knows I have a huge wall calendar. I have 2 side calendars. One is personal, one is, things that need to get done. And I thought I need to start journaling. I need to journal every single day, or as much as again, what is enough and what is giving yourself grace. But how do I feel this morning? And it can be a simple little smiley face, a neutral face, or a frowny face.
Mhm.
Most of the time, it's going to be a smiley face or I'm just neutral. Then you go to, how did I feel before I worked out? How did I feel after I worked out? What did I eat? And then that's an entirely different podcast of nutrition. Am I getting what I need? Because you can either eat junk,
Mhm.
processed foods, or you can try to eat healthy, whole foods, which Pam, I think, is a champion about.
Thank you.
And how does that make you feel?
Mhm.
And can you do it for 30 days? Can you do it for 60 days? Can you do it for 90 days? And are you going to find a pattern? The problem that I find with it for myself, which is consistency, Jerremy Newsome, who I've also had on the podcast, has a challenge for his trading group. And the challenge is you place an ice cube in your sink and you take a picture of it and you send it to him every single day. How many people do you think can do it for 7 days? And all he asks for is a full week, a 7-day. Doesn't matter what day you started on. You could start it on Wednesday or Thursday. How many people do you think can actually finish that challenge?
Very few.
Very few people. And there you have it.
So not to get off on the nutrition part of it, but to me, diet and exercise go together, because if you feel like poo, you're not going to feel like working out. But that to me is a totally separate issue than giving yourself grace.
Yeah, it is. Maybe that'll be part 2.
But I also feel like oftentimes when we want to quit is when we need to give it more. That's when it's the most important to push through your all or give it your all or shut your mind off.
I'm
I
going to
too,
interrupt you really
Go ahead.
quick, Pam,
Yeah.
because that is what I need to work on in 2023. That is exactly what I need to work on. In that regard, I have a very weak mindset. My mindset is always going to say, oh, you're okay. You're tired. You've done enough. You've been up since. You didn't sleep well last night. I mean, on and on and on and on. It's probably why I don't like excuses, because I could be the queen of excuses.
Oh,
I can come up with any possible excuse, but I can also counter every kind of excuse. And you really just hit it. When I don't feel like doing it is exactly when I should get up and do it.
yeah. I mean, even so, there are times, even in the morning, I'm not a huge breakfast eater unless we're at the cabin and we got the Blackstone and the little silicone rings going and it's bacon
but
sausage.
we're also getting up at like 9 or 10 in the morning. Well, you are. Dan and I are up watching the sunrise at 6.
Right. Yeah. You've already had 2 pots of coffee and yeah, the Bailey's is gone. I'm kidding. So there are times I'm not a big breakfast eater, and I have been the last 3 weeks pushing myself something for breakfast. I don't care if 2 hard-boiled egg whites. I don't care if it's a piece of toast. I don't care. breakfast. It makes a huge difference. And I hate admitting that. I don't snack as much then. I mean, I still snack, obviously, but I still don't, I don't feel like at 10 o'clock that I'm famished. And when I'm getting to work for my shift or whatever, that I'm going to have to, ask Dennis to make me some bacon.
Pushing yourself, what I'm hearing from you is pushing yourself
Mhm.
to do things is also grace. So grace is not necessarily letting go. It can also be a push. And I had never thought of it until you just gave that example.
I got goosebumps. I like that.
Grace can also be a push, which is probably what Leslie was trying to state.
Okay. And that makes perfect sense then. So push yourself.
Yeah. To summarize then, where is the point of the threshold? When do you push? When do you not push? That's the challenge. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot that goes into it. Again, we can go back to, how did you sleep last night? What's on the agenda for today? What was your nutrition the past few days? What are you intending to do today? How do you feel about such and such? I think, again, every second, minute, hour, day, nutrition, hydration, we haven't even hit on hydration. I will say, to back up your trying to eat something a little bit right away in the morning, regardless of what it is, I've been focusing on 16 ounces of water every morning. I have one day that I have not done it since January 1st.
Good for you.
Do I feel different? Yeah, I think I do. Is it noticeable? I don't think it's noticeable, but I know that I'm doing my body grace. I'm giving my body grace by drinking that water.
Back to the calendar thing that you were talking about. I also bought a calendar and have been writing down when I finish a workout on the treadmill, or I, do something, not waitressing or working. I don't count my steps or any of that stuff from that, but I've been writing down how much, and I'm like, it's not a lot, but I've been averaging 1.5 miles every day this year so far. And I'm like, it's more than I averaged last January. Well, last January was a little different, but it's more than I averaged last January or last February or last March. And I'm like, did you print out off the little calendar? You have plenty of calendars, but there was one in the iFit group, and it's got like the days of the month across the top. It's got the month across the top, and then it has the days of the month and the letters, and you can color those in or whatever. And it asks for your goal. And we talked about that. Like, my goal for January was just to do some cleansing, some whatever. And I'm excited about that. But now seeing how I can walk, how much time I do have to get out on that treadmill, I'm excited for my goals for February.
And you're giving yourself grace because you're doing education on it. You're putting in real life situations. They're not crazy goals. They're achievable, attainable, realistic. Maybe that's what giving yourself grace is.
I was just going to say that exact same thing.
All right. Anything else before we end today?
No, I'm good.
All right. To all of our listeners, stay awesome and keep reaching for your anything.